going to teach a while this morning on the subject of reaching couples. Reaching couples. I do not know how many lessons I'm going to teach on marriage. By the way, we already had 100 fellows go home to their wives after all these love songs and everything. But I want to talk to you on the subject teaching or reaching couples. Our Heavenly Father, help me to be a help. That's all I ask this morning. I want to be a help. In Jesus' name, amen. I really approach this subject with fear and trembling. One reason I do, because I don't want to say anything that would conflict with what some pastor might say, and I certainly do not want to make anyone feel this pastor's wrong. If I say anything, and I will say some things this morning that are a little bit different from some of your churches, I want you to agree with your pastor and not agree with me. Don't you go home and cause your pastor in trouble. If you go home and cause me in trouble, I'll fly down where you are, fly up where you are, and I'll stand beside him. I'll make the motion to vote you out of the church. So I want to help. Now you understand that your pastor has brought you to the pastor school. And I'm going to say some things basically to help the pastor and instruct the pastor. And it just may be, in fact there will be. There's not a pastor here that's going to agree with everything I say. And certainly not a church here that does everything I'm going to suggest you do, or there's no need for us to come here. I want to make several comments before I start. I'll teach this class lasts for 40 minutes. One, this whole week I have right here 16 pages of outlines right here in my Bible on this one subject alone. Now it's a package. After I finish the first class, you're going to wonder how much you're going to learn, because I'm going to give you some philosophy in the first class and so forth. I want you to take the whole package. Don't just come to pastor school and say, I'm going to come for a day or two. Don't do that. You stay the whole time, the whole package. If I promise you this, if you'll call home and tell them you're going to stay through Thursday night, I promise you that you'll be glad that you did. And you won't be sorry you didn't, because you won't know what you missed. But it's a whole package, and I want you to get the whole package. Now let me, a second word of caution. Let me finish the whole package before you criticize. Third thing I want to say is don't let a disagreement on one point rob you of the help you can get on all the other points. Next thing I want to say is I have practiced what I'm going to say this morning all of my ministry. This is not something that I've decided to change. This is the way the First Baptist Church of Hammond has been built. It's the way the Miller Road Baptist Church of Garland, Texas was built many years ago. And this is not something that is new to me. The philosophies I'm going to present to you are philosophies that I believe for all these many years. Now, I made this statement to my people last Wednesday night, and I think it's true. If we had a secret ballot in our church as to whether the pastor stayed or left, and we have about 4,000 to 5,000 people here on Wednesday night. This building is not as full as it is now, but it looks pretty full. And if we had a secret ballot, and the ballot simply said, I want Brother Hyles to stay, or I want Brother Hyles to leave, I would be stunned and shocked if there was one negative vote. You won't find a church more united than this church. And by the way, you won't find a church that stood with a preacher like this church has stood with this preacher either. Now, we're talking about building a strong church, and I want to help you do that. So hear me out. I'm worried, and I'm going to start off right off the bat, and I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to help everybody. But I'm a little worried that we're getting the tail wagging the dog. I'm concerned about a church running 150 in Sunday school baptizing 1,000 people. Now, I'm not against the baptizing 1,000 people, but if you don't get that 150 up, you're not going to baptize 1,000 people very long. I'm concerned about us building strong churches. Now, the purpose of building a strong church is so you can baptize more people. But if we don't, for example, I want to, when you hear about First Baptist Church of Hammond, and you hear about all the conversions and so forth, and the size we are, when you come here to visit us, I don't want you to be disappointed. I want you to see something here, and I want to have a base and a strong church that's here. Now, please do not misunderstand me. Look, I have paid my dues to the poor. Nobody knows. Nobody can say that I have not stood for the poor. I have paid my dues to the bus ministry. I have championed the bus ministry across America. Before you criticize me this morning because I'm going against the bus ministry, let me remind you that whoever you are, we had several times more buses last Sunday than you did, and so I'm not opposed to the bus ministry. I believe in the bus ministry with all of my heart. But you know, First Baptist Church, every once in a while I'll feel like the buses need a little boost, and we'll have a spring program or a fall program that emphasizes strongly the buses. Then I'll feel like we need to have the drive-in crowd boosted a little bit. So I may have an entire fall program that'll just emphasize the drive-in crowd. Or I may have a fall program or a spring program emphasize just the reaching of adults, mainly the reaching of adults. I'm trying to keep the proper balance. Now, if you have 500 in Sunday school and 50 on buses, you're not right with God. If you had 50 drive-in and 500 on buses, you're not right with God either. I want you to keep the balance. Now, I think I've stressed it, and I've championed the causes of the poor and the underprivileged. I think that I have maybe gone over a little bit, and maybe I have need to come back now and say, let's get the home base in good shape. Let's get the drive-in crowd. So I want to make some statements this morning. I'm afraid I've unknowingly left some wrong impressions, and I'm going to parenthesize for a second. I'm afraid that in an effort to stress some things, I have left the wrong impressions. For example, my statement about the local church being the only institution that is promised divine perpetuity. I believe that. I believe the local church is the only institution in the world that's promised divine perpetuity. Now, some of you folks know what perpetuity means. It's a land up here in the brain, the perpetuity land up here. And God has said, upon this rock Jesus said, upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell should not prevail against it. Now, here's what I've done. I have left the impression that I'm against everything that's not a local church, under a local church. I'm not. I simply said that God has promised the local church divine perpetuity, and I believe anything that can operate outside the local church can operate better inside the local church and under the auspices of the local church. But I'm not opposed to old rock out beside the road saying Jesus saves, even if the local church doesn't own the rock. I want to make that very plain, and I think it's my fault. I've left the wrong impression. I'm not against parachurch organizations. I'm against most of them because most of them not worth a dime. But now I worked with Dr. John Rice on the Sword of the Lord for many, many years, and it was not under a local church. I happen to have thought all the time it could operate it better under a local church than it could outside of a local church. So it's not a matter of it being wrong because it's not under a local church. Let me say it again. You won't find. I've championed the cause of the local church. I've championed the cause. I don't believe in the universal church. I don't believe in the invisible church. I think that's the interdenominational hogwash. I don't believe in it at all. But if a guy decides he wants to start going up down the street telling folks about Jesus and is not sponsored by the local church, I'm for what the guy's doing. I think he can do it better under the auspices. I'm scared all of a sudden behind my own pulpit. I think I've left the wrong impression. I thought I was. And also, I've left the wrong impression about my position about certain institutions with which I disagree. If I listed 10 institutions here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it may be that my line of acceptance is lower than you think it is. For example, just because a college is not my favorite college does not mean I'm against that college. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not recommending anybody to go to Bob Jones University, so don't get worried about that. But so I'll make myself very plain. I'm a Baptist, and I think that Baptist preachers ought to get trained at Baptist colleges, but I think sometimes if we are not totally for something, we're totally against something, and I may have left that wrong impression. It's a degree of acceptance and a degree of the positive. Now, let's get down to what I'm going to talk about this morning. One of my staff members came to me, a college staff member, and said, "Brother Hyles, during the Revival Fires Conference, there was a preacher that criticized Hyles-Anderson College." And I said, "Well, what was it?" And he said that this preacher criticized Hyles-Anderson College by making a statement that you can't build a church. You guys have your bus routes. You can't build a church like you build these bus routes. And he said that from the platform. And I said, and I agree with him. I agree with him. You can't build a church like you build a bus route. And so let me illustrate. I want to tell you a story of something that happened here when I first came. I'd been here a little less than a year, and some bus kids came to me and said, "We're sick and tired of the rich people around here." And they said, "We've had a meeting of all the bus kids, and either the rich people are going to go or we're going to go." Well, I didn't want to lose the rich people, and I didn't want to lose the bus kids. And so I wrestled with that thing, and I wrestled with it. And the bus kids said, "You've got till Sunday. It's Thursday night right now. You got till Sunday. We're tired of these Cadillacs parked on the parking lot out here. And you got till Sunday to make your decision." I got in my car and I drove all night long. I drove up and down the streets of Munster, Indiana. I looked at those big houses and I said, "I don't want to lose those rich people, but I don't want to lose the bus kids." All night long I wrestled with this thing, and I heard the bus kids saying, it's us or the rich people. It's us or the rich people. If the rich people stay, we're going to leave. If we stay, the rich people have got to leave. And I wrestled. Finally, about 6 o'clock in the morning, I was over on Lake Michigan, just off at the Hilton Hotel there on the lobby, on the sidewalk. The sun was coming up on the eastern shore there. I fell on my face. A crowd of about 400 people gathered around me. And all of a sudden, I jumped up and I said, "I'll take the rich people." Now, that story isn't true, but it would have been true if the bus kids had made that statement to me. I wasn't choosing the bus kids. I was choosing the people that somebody didn't want. We often use that little parable in the 14th chapter of Luke about the great supper a man built. And we say, yeah, Jesus said, "Go to the highways and hedges and get the poor and the lame." And he did. But let me remind you first that he sent the folks first downtown to the silk stock in the street. He did not witness to those. They didn't do it. So he said, "Go get the others." But he didn't say, "Go first." He said, what he's saying is get everybody. So we need to rethink a few things. You're already mad at me, aren't you? And now I feel like everybody's against me, but I'm like the fellow who lived on the, don't take pictures now while I'm teaching here. I'll pose for you with my shirt off in the alley after it's over. But I'm like a guy that lived on the border of the North and the South in the Civil War. Didn't know who to fight for, so he decided to put on a gray top and a blue bottom. And the North shot him in the top, and the South shot him in the bottom. And that's the way I feel this morning. I feel like I'm going to get shot from both sides. But really, if anybody ever wanted to help you, I want to help you this morning. Several statements. Number one, you don't build a church on the bus ministry. You build the bus ministry on the church. I recommend to our young men at Hyles-Anderson College, they go out to start a church. They don't start a bus ministry right away. You get you a good solid base there of 100, 150 people before you start a bus ministry. and recommend that. Now, by the way, this is not something new. I believe this all through these many long years. Bus ministries do not build churches. Strong churches build bus ministries. You don't build a church on the Spanish ministry. You build a Spanish ministry on the church. You don't build a church on the servicemen's ministry. You build the servicemen's ministry on the church. You don't build a church on the truck driver's ministry. You build a truck driver's ministry on the church. You don't build a church on the street people or rescue mission ministry. You build the street people or rescue mission ministry on the church. You don't build a church on the educable slow or the deaf or the senior citizen rest homes and Christian schools or youth ministers or jails. You don't build churches on those. The first thing you do is you build yourself a strong, solid, middle-class, drive-in crowd of tithing people, and then they finance all these other ministries. But one of these days your superstructure is going to crumble if you don't have that foundation. Statement number 2, I've already implied it, you build a church on middle-class adults. First Baptist Church of Hammond is a cross-section of society. But this church, I was preaching not long ago at a place, and I felt like I got up. It was at a convention, and the man that was in charge of introducing speakers didn't even know me. He had heard about me. And he got up and he said, "This is Hyles. He has a big church, but they're all a bunch of poor bus kids." And I said, yes. I got up and I said, yes, you're right. All a bunch of bus kids, but not poor bus kids, because they gave $88,000 in undesignated offering last Sunday morning. Now, the $88,000 didn't come from bus kids. But you don't get to $88,000. You don't spend $1 million a year on bus kids. And you're going to have to you're going to have to build that growth on solid foundation of middle-class drive-in people. We have fellows, I said to our students, Hyles University College, we got some young men here. If you went out and knocked on a door of a $100,000 house, you couldn't win them to Christ. You wouldn't know what to do. If they weren't poor bus kids begging for something to eat, you wouldn't know how to win them to Christ. But I want to say it again. A strong bus ministry will not, all across America, I see churches that have stopped the bus ministry. You know why they stopped the bus ministry? Because they're going under financially. You know why they're going under financially? Because they put the bus ministry as the foundation rather than the superstructure. So the bus ministry that's the first thing that suffers. First thing you cut out is the bus. You got to pay your light bill. You got to pay your indebtedness payment. You got to pay the salaries, and you got to take care of the basic things. But you don't have to send the buses. And churches say, well, we're down a little bit right now because we had to drop 6 of our buses. Now, the reason you dropped 6 of your buses is you didn't get a strong enough foundation to keep those 6 buses rolling. And you better listen to me. You better go back home and spend a lot of your time knocking on doors of middle-class people, reaching middle-class people so they can finance the bus ministry. And this is not speaking against the bus ministry. It's speaking for the bus ministry and for its perpetuation, which is completely dependent upon your getting middle-class people in your church to finance all these other ministries. Statement number 3. I said first statement was you don't build a church on the bus ministry, you build a bus ministry on the church. I said secondly, you build a church on middle-class adults. And thirdly, to do this, you reach young adults. Young adults. Your big thrust in your church ought to be reaching young adults. Number 4, the teens and children are not the church of tomorrow in your church. Every once in a while I hear somebody stand up and say, boy, thank God for our young people. They're this church of tomorrow. No, they're not. You check with the adults in your church and see how many of them grew up in your church. Most of those teenagers are not going to be adults in your church. Your church is built by constant replenishment. Are you too cool this morning? You too cool? Turn me, Randy, about 1 degree warmer. I see some ladies that are covering up their bikinis. Take that off the tape, please, people. Young adults are the church of tomorrow. Now, what you're doing is this. You're training those young people, but you're training those young people for America. Most of them are not going to be in your church when they get married. So you've got to constantly be enlisting young adults, and we'll say an awful lot about this week. Statement number 5, I call this tool making. Tool making. The middle class adults, and of course to have them regularly, you got to have young adults. The middle class, and you say, well, why young adults? Young adults are easier to reach than middle-aged adults are. So the young adults become the tools by which you build the church. The car that we told Brother Burr it was his last night is even now being towed back to the dealership. That car would not be there if there hadn't have been a tool and die company somewhere. Some place has to make the tools. Some place has to make the dies. And in a church, you got to have the tools. And the tools of reaching multitudes of people, you call those young adults. Next statement. Once you get the tools, now this is where we're going to part company here for a few minutes. Once you get the tools, use them. Most churches are filled with unused tools. Now that's not our crowd, that's the other crowd. Our churches are emptied with tools that are kicked out because they're not finished tools yet. That's why we're going to break company here. But most churches are filled with tools that they're not being used. They sit there on the pew and they're not being used. Next statement. However, it takes a while to build a tool. You don't get a piece of iron and all of a sudden say, be thou a tool. You don't get a person saved and say, be thou a soul winner. Be thou a bus worker. It takes a while to build these tools. So number 8, and here we're going to part company, don't throw the tools away while they're in making. Idiot. Stupid. Don't throw the tools away while they're in making. Don't make it soul winning or nothing. Look, non-soul winners' tithe checks will cash just like soul winners' checks will cash. In fact, I found they cash a little better than the soul winners' checks do. So what you do is you say, if you're not a soul winner, get out of here. Would you tell them to come over here? We'll make them soul winners, and while we're making their soul winners, we'll cash their checks. It should not, a tool that's not yet a soul winner should not be embarrassed in the church services. A tool that's being in making that's not yet in the bus ministry should not feel like a second-class citizen yet. I have some tools at First Baptist Church it took me a year to make. I have some tools at First Baptist Church it took me 10 years to make. Now some of you guys have chased them off within 10 days. But not me. I'm trying to make tools out of them. Next statement is, anybody still love me? I'm glad you do, because I hate you, I tell you for sure. Next statement I want to make, number 9 I have here. While they are in the making, use them as they can and will be used. I have some people that come to church on Sunday morning, come back on Sunday night, come back on Wednesday night, tithe, and they win souls to Christ, work in the bus ministry or some other ministry. And by the way, I want to say this too. A person that's a soul winner that's not in the bus ministry might be worth keeping. In many of our churches, being a bus worker is the symbol of being right with God. Did you know if a person has a walk-in ministry and wins folks that walk to church, that might be pretty good too? or maybe a bicycle ministry, or a ice skate ministry, or something. Look, I paid my due. Don't any of you rascals say, hey, he's fighting the bus ministry. You got a hole in your head big enough to drive Bill Burr's car through, and almost big enough to drive Bill Burr through. On the other hand, I have some folks in my church come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and tithe, but they're not soul winners yet. On the other hand, I have some folks come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, don't come to church on Wednesday night. On the other hand, I have some folks come to church on Sunday morning and tithe and don't come to church Sunday night or Wednesday night, or don't work on the bus ministry. They're not soul winners. On the other hand, I have some folks just come to church on Sunday morning and tithe. On the other hand, I have some folks just come to church on Sunday morning. Now here's my statement that's going to cause you to go home after this session. None of these should be second-class citizens. They're tools in the making. And just because they're not tools yet, do you know most of the people that come back on Sunday night didn't used to come on Sunday night? Most of the people that here at First Baptist that come on Wednesday night didn't used to come on Wednesday night. And your church, they'd be gone because you chased them off because they don't come on Wednesday night. Don't misunderstand me. I stand here and preach. Everybody ought to be, every time, I say this often, every time those hinges on those doors squeak, you ought to walk through those doors. But I want you to know that the people that don't walk through those doors on Wednesday night are not second-class citizens. They're tools in the making, and they should not be unloved, and they should not be unfed. If I find anything in the Scripture, I find that you're supposed to lift up the one that's fallen, not send him to the next ditch. It says it's supposed to bind up those that are broken and heal those that are sick. I'm a little worried, and I haven't been to your churches, but I'm worried a little bit that we have the idea that if you're not in everything, you ought to feel like you're a second-class citizen. These people are prospective tools, and they may be small but still usable tools, and they're tools in the making. Number 10, they must be used as much as possible. Get all from each person that you can get. Number 3, I've implied this already, do not be all or nothing. If a fellow doesn't tithe, but he makes $10,000 a month, if he just give $100 a month, that's not tithe of $10,000, but $100 is sure better than the other church getting $100. So write your check. You say, are you being bought off? Get my tapes and see if I'm being bought off. No, I'm not being bought off. I just believe that everybody in a church who attends the church ought to be treated with dignity and love and kindness and tenderness. You know, I feel like a pussyfooter. It doesn't feel bad at all. If I'd known it felt this good to pussyfoot, I'd done it years ago. I realized it right now how John MacArthur really feels. It's great. Then, and I've said this before, do not drive them away, but maintain them. Now, this is not new stuff to most of you. Any organization that's going to be a success has got to have 2 departments, production and maintenance. Miss Hyles, every 2 years I buy her a car. Start off with a small car, and then every 2 years I buy her a nicer car. And several years ago I bought her an Oldsmobile, and the salesman was nice and good. We got a good price on it, and everything was fine. Took it back to get it serviced, and on the way home she pushed it on the brake and the radio came on. She pushed the brake again, the radio turned off. Every time she pushed the brake, if the radio was off, it would turn on, and if it was on, it was turned off. We didn't buy another car there. You call that a fundamental Baptist service department. Smile at me, I'm scared. You call that an independent fundamental Baptist maintenance department. Now, listen to me carefully. You may produce a lot of people, but if you don't have a maintenance department, you're not going to keep a lot of people. And you don't keep a lot of people, you don't have the tools it's going to take to build a great church. This church is built on solid couples and families that drive their that drive their Chevrolets and Plymouths and Chryslers and park in the parking lot out there and bring their families to our Sunday school and sit in these pews and sing in the choir and serve on the deacon board and ushers in the church and teach Sunday school classes. Those are our tools. And ladies and gentlemen, in our ministries, it's time we got back to realizing we've got to have a tool-making company or we're going to fall flat on our face as far as the big production is concerned. So maintain your people. I say we ought to out-teach the teacher type. Folks that come to your church ought to get more Bible doctrine than Moody Institute gives them. You ought to out-teach the teacher type. I promise you, if you've been here Sunday morning in my Sunday school class, you'd learn something. You ought to out-teach the teacher type. We ought to out-comfort the comforting type. We ought to out-positive the positive thinkers. We ought to out-love the loving, out-wise and out-wit the wise, out-feed the deeper lifers. We ought to out-pastor the pastoral types. I'm trying to say that we ought to maintain and feed and pastor our people. I'm talking about hospital calls. I'm talking about caring for the sick and the shut-ins. I'm talking about the rest homes. I'm talking about your funerals. Your funeral should not be the latest evangelistic crusade. Did you know, fundamental independent Baptist preacher, did you know if you don't preach on hell at a funeral, it's not pussyfooting? The most comforting funeral service in your town ought to be at the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church. The most beautiful wedding conducted in your town ought not to be at First Lutheran Church. It ought to be at King James Bible Baptist Church. You call this servicing the tools, servicing your people. You know what I'd do if I were you? I'd get my Wednesday night tapes, and I'm not trying to make any money. If I were you, I'd get the Wednesday night tapes I just taught on marriage. 22, I think, of them. I'd get those tapes, and I'd study, and I would teach those things tape for tape and lesson for lesson and work on the marriages of my people if I were you. I'd get my tapes on justice. I'd teach them. And by the way, you don't have to tell anybody where you got it. Just tell them how smart you are. And I'm not trying to say, but I'm trying to tell you this. You need to feed your people. I said you need to feed your people. Meet their needs. Without them, you will not build a lasting church. Do not build a flash-in-the-pan church. These are they who finance the other ministries. And you say, well, Jesus said, go get the poor. Let me remind you something, Buster and Busterettes. He said get the poor, but if you'll check your New Testament in case you have one, if you'll check it very carefully, you'll find what Jesus did was he took 12 middle-class people. One was a former tax collector. Two had operated a business. He took 12 middle-class people and spent 3 years training them and ministering to them and preparing them to be his tools. And you better go home, and you better realize that you are, by the way, you devoted Peter out of the church when he cursed and denied the Lord the faith in the church. You just said, hey, good, bad rubbish is good riddance. Just get your little self and trot your little carcass out of here. They're going to vote your carcass out too. Now look, Sunday night I preached here, all these microphones here. When I got through, I kicked them all over. There was not a microphone standing, and I feel sorry if you'll push a foot in one microphone preachers. And I preach as hard as you do, but before you copy my Sunday night sermon, you might better get my Sunday morning sermon and listen to it. When I made love to my people for about 30 minutes up here behind this platform. There's not a person in the First Baptist Church of Hammond, Indiana that doesn't know that Brother Hyles loves them. Not a one. And they also know that if they don't agree with me, it's not agree or get out. They know that I love them, and I want to use them as much as I can as a tool. They're tools in training, if you please. I preached in the great churches of America of the past generation. I preached in the First Baptist Church of Fort Worth, where J. Frank Norris was pastor for years. I'm an old man. I preached in Moody Church in Chicago. I preached at Jarvis Street Baptist Church in Toronto, where Dr. T.T. Shields was the famous pastor. I preached in Dr. Oswald Smith's People's Church in Toronto, Canada. I preached for Dr. G.B. Vick in the Temple Baptist Church in Detroit. I noticed something, all of these churches, let me tell you what happened to them. When I preached there, it was in the last part of the man's ministry or after the main man had left. They had one thing in common. Looked like a snowstorm had dropped on the heads of all the people. They were a bunch of gray-beard people who, when they were young, had built that church. And now then, they did not get young couples to replenish them. And the churches, they're good people. They're tithing people. They know the Bible. And they're praying people, but there are no young people, young couples coming up. You heard me say this. Don't break the tools while building them, and you've heard this many times. But for you new people, I'll say it. We have 4 types of people sitting in these pews every Sunday morning. Number one, the people that agree with everything I say because I say it. If Brother Hyles says it, it's true. Now these are the most intelligent people that we have in our church. But if there's a second group of people in First Baptist Church of Hammond, and that's the group of people that believe what I say because they already believed it and they found me. They came to our church and they said, wow, I didn't know anybody preached like that anymore. That's what I used to hear. And they agree because they already agreed before they came. Third group of people that weigh what I say and decide whether they agree or not. They listen to me and decide whether they believe it or not. Fourth group of people don't believe a thing I say but love to hear me say it. They don't like what I say, but they love to see microphones flying around here all the time while I'm preaching. I'll make it very plain. And if this crucifies me, get your hammer and nails out. I'll gladly die on your cross. But did you know the word love is still in the Bible? Anybody ever tell you that Jesus said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples because you love one another? Ever dawn on you about that? I'm giving you some new doctrine now. I was down years ago. There used to be a store down here called Joe Hirsch men's store. One day, Dr. G.B. Vick came by to see me, and he was still pastoring Temple Baptist Detroit. I took him down to buy him a suit. We walked in the store there. It had just an entrance, only one entrance, small private men's store. I was going to buy him a suit. We walked in, and there stood right in the front of me one of our members from group number 4. Group number 4 doesn't agree with the thing I preach, but they love to hear me preach it. She had on a tight pair of pants. Either that, or either she had on a tight pair of black pants, or she'd painted herself black from her waist down. I'm not sure. And if pants were okay, they wouldn't be okay for her. And they're not okay, in case you'd like to know. She looked at me, and there she was. She tried to find the door. There's no door to escape. Only way out was the door I was standing in. I don't know what she said, but it seemed like she said, "Even so come, Lord Jesus." I think that's what she said. And I walked over to her. And I said, no, I'll call her Mrs. Jones. That's not her name. I remember her name. I said, "Mrs. Jones, I'm so glad to see you. I want you to meet one of my heroes, Dr. G.B. Vick. And Brother Vick, I want you to meet one of my fine members. This is Miss Jones." Miss Jones and her husband have been in our church for several years, and I love them with all my heart. And I'm so proud to introduce to you Mrs. Jones, one of the members of my church. He was stunned. And I said, "Miss Jones, I'm so glad you got to meet Brother Vick. And Brother Vick, I'm so glad you got to meet Mrs. Jones." A few days later, I got a letter. "Dear Brother Hyles, you may remember that you saw me in Joe Hurst's store last week." I did remember. In fact, those pants are ever before me. And she's the kind that you'd have had no evil thoughts if you'd have seen her. Just like some of you gals. But she said, "I've never felt so loved in my life." She said, "I know I embarrassed you. I know you felt bad about it." She said, I can't believe you treated me like you treated me. You made me feel like a queen." By the way, Ms. Jones gave up her pants a few weeks later. And she moved up a notch as far as the class is concerned. She got promoted from class number 4 to class number 3. Now, I know what you've done. "Well, you go get some decent clothes on, get your skirt on. I might introduce you to Dr. Vick." And you get voted out because you're courageous. You think that you get voted out because you're an idiot. That's what you get voted out for. Next statement, make the tools and tools in making feel more important than anyone else in the church. Now, I hate to even say what I'm going to say right now, because I'm not against what you guys are doing, but we don't do it here. Here at First Baptist Church, the tools get more attention than the others do. Here at First Baptist, for example, we have built an adult-flavored church. Children don't wave their Bibles at First Baptist Church of Hammond. Children don't stand up and holler, "Well, glory," or preach it. They sit and listen at First Baptist Church of Hammond. Folks that wave their Bibles are adults at First Baptist Church of Hammond. Now, I don't understand me. If your pastor doesn't do it, say, "Well, he's right and I'm wrong." But I'm telling you how we do it here, and how I've done it for 51 years of preaching the gospel and half a century of pastoring. We want the children to sit and listen. And it's an adult-flavored church. If you were here last Sunday night, and you'd have seen a bunch of people jump up and wave their Bible, "Well, glory, preach it!" Some of them have white hair. Some have no hair. And now, I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong. I'm telling you what we do here at First Baptist Church. This church is an adult-flavored, drive-in flavored church. We're trying to make tools so we can reach every poor person we can. And before you crucify me on your altar of pharisaical phylacteries, let me put my poor people beside yours. Over 100 people off the streets of Chicago that slept on the sidewalks last night sat right up here last Sunday morning. I imagine 12, 13,000 people or more rode buses to First Baptist Church Hammond last Sunday morning. We had 7 truck drivers saved last Sunday morning, 22 sailors saved last Sunday morning. But you hear me carefully. We wouldn't have had those street people. We wouldn't have had those truck drivers. And we wouldn't have had those sailors. And we wouldn't have had those bus kids if this church were not built solidly around the drive-in adult middle-class people. I'm not saying only get them. I'm saying don't neglect them. Don't drive past a middle-class house to get to the slums. Go to the slums and stop on the middle-class house on the way. It's been nice knowing you. We'll all meet in this section over here this afternoon after it's all over. Now, don't you criticize somebody. You go, boy, I'm glad he got him. I'll nail your hide before the week's out too, Pharisee. I'm not trying to get anybody. I'm not trying to nail anybody's hide to the wall. I'm just trying to help the people that I love with all of my heart. I'm the only old man pastoring in our movement, just about. I mean, this church is the only church of 1,000 people or more that I know of that's pastored by a man that's 70 years of age or older. Literally hundreds of you are my preacher boys, and I love you with all my heart. I want to look down from heaven one of these days, and I want to see a church flourishing 20 years from now. If it flourishes 20 years from now, you got to build some tools, or you can't build the product. And we'll continue talking about this a bit later.